guys here. So that's anybody that's online. This time, I believe we have special music. Very good. Thank you. I guess I should have mentioned as a praise, obviously Caitlin was in quarantine for possible exposure, and ultimately that made pretty much all of us in quarantine of sorts all of last week. And her test results finally came back on Friday, and she was negative, which is good. So the reverse there. So yes, yes, she was negative, and so we were positive about that, and so that was good as well. Although, I probably shouldn't say this with Michelle here, but she was hoping for a positive so she could miss work for the next 2 weeks. Thought that was a pretty good deal. But we want to go to Numbers chapter 11 here this morning as we continue on living Christianity in quarantine, or properly, how to respond to chaos. And here in this chapter, in fact, we'll go quickly through the chapter, 35 verses. Again, we know most of the events that have happened with the nation of Israel in their journey, but I think there's so many points to be seen and made to our life, to our circumstances today, whether it be COVID or whether it be whatever else comes next. And if the Lord tarries, we can be confident that something else will be coming next, because as the sparks fly upward, so man is born to adversity. And so as we look at this chapter, again, we have one more thing that we need to know, kind of summarizing it, and I'm going to call this knowing leadership. And I realize that it's easy for us to excuse ourselves, oh, hey, well, I'm not in a leadership position. But the truth is that we have all been servant leaders to lead in serving others. And all of us, regardless of our age, regardless of our gender, regardless of our positions in life, have a role in leading. And certainly there are times when in that role, the journey isn't easy. And perhaps this isn't often caused by necessarily COVID or viruses, but certainly the number of instances and causes of issues in our leadership are vast. How do I respond? Numbers chapter 11, I think, gives us some great points. Several positive, one negative aspect of it. but all truths that we can learn from, glean from, and apply to our lives. But before we dive into this, let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for your word. I pray that our time together would bring honor and glory to you. I pray that you'd allow me to decrease so that you alone would increase, so that you would challenge my mind and guard my words, that be able to grasp the truths for us today, right now, here from Numbers 11, but as well for tomorrow, and whatever our next may be, of the journey that was had here in this chapter, and be able to learn from it, live in it. And we thank you for what you'll do. We thank you that you are a God that doesn't change. And while the world is in a constant state of change, while truthfully things seem to be waxing worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived, I just pray that you would remind us of your unchanging goodness, your unchanging love, and we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Last time we looked at knowing our responsibility, and we need to know that God was leading, God's order, and God's purpose. If you recall this a couple weeks ago, we discussed old Kobab, potentially Moses' brother-in-law, although it can be argued that it could have also been another name for his father-in-law. But we have Kobab, who joined them there at Mount Sinai time frame, and has been, I don't want to use the word coerced, but he's been encouraged to go with them, and it seemingly he has, from what we read later on in the time frame. But when we consider the leadership of Numbers chapter 11, we consider our own lives, whatever roles we have in leadership, whether it be in our home, in our church, in our work, in our community, even just within the body of Christ as servant leaders, as I already mentioned. What happens when things get difficult there? Dwight Eisenhower is quoted as saying this: in order to be a leader, a man must have followers. And to have followers, a man must have their confidence. Hence, the supreme quality of a leader is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible. No matter whether it is on the section gang, on a football field, in an army, or in an office, if a man's associates find him guilty of phoniness, if they find that he lacks forthright integrity, he will fail. His teachings and actions must square with each other. The first great need, therefore, is integrity and high purpose. More recently, somebody wrote this: the problem with being a leader today is that you can't be sure whether people are following you or chasing you. And I think that's potentially the case. I think there's another situation, another problem with leadership, illustrated by a train conductor. Just before a train was getting ready to leave the station, train conductor came through to collect the tickets. The first person's ticket, and he looked at it, and it was to a different destination than where he was going. So he quickly alerted to the passenger to say, hey, quick, get your stuff and get off the train, and you need to find the right train, because that's not where we're going. And the first passenger kind of looked a little confused and kind of started slowly gathering his stuff, but was a little perplexed at the situation. And the conductor grabs the second and third person's tickets and looks at him, and it's to the same destination as the first guy. And so he says to all three of them, why are you on this train? Why are you here? How did all three of you wind up on the wrong train? And all three of them admitted that it was the ticket guy had told them and instructed them, get on that train right there, and it'll take you where you want to go. Well, rather irate, the conductor gets off the train and marches his way over to that ticket agent and demands to know why he was so foolish as to send people on that train to that destination when that train wasn't going to that destination. Well, in a perhaps a little wordy conversation, it was determined that that train was indeed going to that destination. It was the conductor that was on the wrong train. And how often in leadership we are the problem. We are the situation. We're on the wrong train. We're going the wrong direction. We aren't going where we ought to be going, and we've got to be aware of that as well. But look at Numbers chapter 11. 4 quick points, and I hope to keep them quick here this morning, but 4 points that we want to look at here in this chapter. Let me read verse 1. When the people complained, it displeased the Lord, and the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. Now I have to admit that there is great perplexity of what exactly is going on in verse 1. There doesn't seem to be really any parallel aspect of it, or whether this actually people being burned. Was it just tents? Was it just on the outside of the town, outside of the community, but not within the camp? Or was it reverse? Or was it there seems to be very little understanding. But what we do know is the Lord was not pleased and fire fell. We are not aware of the details, but we know, as we will see here in a few moments, that it was enough of a circumstance that even the name was called. And so here we have in verse 1, the people complained, God was displeased, and fire fell. Can you imagine today if every time someone complained, fire fell? Imagine how many people every time they complain about the president, there goes fire, or Congress, or Illinois, or whatever it might be. Boy, it all works well until that fire is directed our direction. The people complained, God was displeased, fire falls. Verse 2. And the people cried unto Moses, and when Moses prayed unto the Lord, the fire was quenched. And he called the name of that place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them. For our first point here this morning, we got to catch up here on the slides here. With the shriek. Well, when you have the shriek, our response ought to be to pray. In verse 2 it says, and the people cried. This is after they complained. They complained, God brings judgment upon them. Now verse 2, their complaining turns to crying. And that word crying literally is the word that means shrieking, if I can use that as would that be a participle? Shrieking. And in my mind, I kind of have that idea of, if you ever, like perhaps on the news after a catastrophic event, or perhaps a shooting in one of the big cities, they're interviewing somebody and they're worked up, and obviously for obvious reasons, but they're worked up in their voices, we'll say a little pitchy, and it's just a very shrilly shriek, and it's almost to that annoying status. Well, here the people are shrieking unto Moses. What do we do in that moment? As parents, probably every parent has lived through this, when one sibling is shrieking at or about another sibling. What do you do as a parent? Lose your mind? Lock yourself in the bedroom? Tell them to go outside? Work it out in the backyard? Lose your lose your temple right there. Lose your temper. If it's at the job, you just go find a new job. But look at what Moses did. When we considered all the options we would have, when the complaining leads to shrieking, what do I do? As a leader, what do I do? As a husband, what do I do? As a pastor, what do I do? As an employee, or if I have people under me, as an employer, what is it that I do? As someone that is trying to be a servant in our community, what is it that is my response and our response when the complaining goes to shrieking? When it's not just the annoyance of the complaining, but that complaining takes a whole other step up, and even their voice begins to shriek in our ears. How do we respond? Here's how Moses has responded. He went to the Lord in prayer for them. He petitioned them before his God. And we don't know. We don't have the prayer recorded. We don't know exactly what Moses prayed. It seems because it says in the Lord, the fire was quenched. It seems that his prayer was that this would be resolved, that the fire would stop. In other words, Moses is petitioning the Lord for mercy for a people, can I say it this way? In my opinion, for a people who didn't deserve it. But Moses goes before the Lord with a desire for mercy. And the fire stopped. Which literally means a burning. You ever found yourself in the same shoes? Complaining goes to shrieking. Maybe even we were the one that went from complaining to shrieking, but have you ever been on the other side of the voice and the complaining goes to shrieking? Is it not often the case that you want justice to fall? You know, for instance, if this were me, if I were Moses, they complain. Not the first time they complained. They're complaining again. Fire falls. They come to me as Moses and say, Moses, make it stop. You know what the tendency would be, as far as from my vantage point? Hey, you had this coming. God has already warned you and already punished you for your complaining. You had this coming. You're going to have to deal with what is being measured out against you. The world kind of calls it karma. Certainly there's numerous videos of how karma, as they call it, karma, gets played out. I like the ones that obviously where people aren't actually injured. But it seems like I saw one where a guy is on the... It often happens this way. The person behind has actually got a dash cam. And he's watching this car in front of him. In fact, driving too close to this car. And the guy in front has a bit of a road rage incident. Stops his car, just jumps out of his vehicle and comes back to yell at the guy for following too closely. And while he is there, traffic stop, yelling at it, some distracted driver comes through and just completely obliterates his car. And you almost kind of have to chuckle at that, thinking, "Man, you had that coming for you. What do you think is stopping on the highway here to lose your mind at the guy behind you because you were afraid he might hurt your car, but in so doing, you have now obliterated your car." And it almost, I mean, it shouldn't be this way, but you almost kind of chuckle at, boy, you had that one coming. That was just dumb. That was an ignorant thing to do. Why? Well, I'm sitting here in verse 2 thinking, here are the people that have gone from complaining to shrieking. And they're shrieking at me for something that they have done and the judgment that God is giving to them for what they have done. They're now shrieking at me to say, make it stop. I think it's human nature to say, hey, you had that one coming. That was a dumb move on your part. And you're going to have to deal with the judgment as judgment falls. Deal with it. But I'm humbled by the very reality that when the shrieking started, with the shriek, pray. That's not necessarily Moses. Well, we don't know exactly what he's praying for, but I suspect it wasn't just that Moses would have the patience to deal with them. I suspect that his prayer wasn't just about him. I suspect that his prayer wasn't, "Dear Lord, I cannot handle the people's complaining and shrieking anymore, make it stop." I suspect that he literally comes before, because he's done it already in the past, he's gone before the Lord potentially again, begging for mercy on their behalf for a judgment that they deserve. And I think that is a challenge for us today in whatever capacity we have leadership. Because I can guarantee you, if you're leading in anything, complaining will often go to shrieking. How do I respond at that point? Will I rejoice in the falling judgment? Or will I come before my God praying for mercy? Taberah. Have you ever visited that place? Have you ever visited the place where God has passed judgment upon the actions of others, but in that Taberah, you went before the Lord in petitioning Him to resolve the issue, to have mercy, to find goodness? Taberah. Been there before? When the shrieking begins, pray. The second point, I think, is written for me, and my wife will probably completely agree with this one as well, as far as for me. Verse 4, it says, "And the mixed multitude that was among them." Let me just stop right there. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, as they are leaving Egypt, it says this, "And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, and even very much cattle." This mixed multitude that is mentioned in Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, and again mentioned here in Numbers chapter 11, verse 4, seems to be those that are not descendants of Abraham. It may have been very close friends, although that may be somewhat unlikely. It may have been, neighbors from Egypt that had a great heart for the children of Israel and decided to leave with them, which also may be potentially unlikely. In my opinion, perhaps more likely is through marriage. The children of Israel were undoubtedly marrying with the children of Egypt. And now we have, exactly like Moses, marrying somebody that was not an Egyptian, but someone outside of the descendants of Abraham. We have a mixed multitude. We have those that aren't children of Israel that are part of the group. So verse 4 says, "And the mixed multitude that were among them fell a-lusting." And before we can point any fingers at that mixed multitude, well, they weren't part of Abraham's descendants anyway, so why was anybody even listening? It continues on in verse 4, "And the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who shall give us flesh to eat?" Now, what I find amazing in regards to verse 4 is verse 1 begins with complaining. God brings down fire. That complaining goes to shrieking to Moses, "Moses, please make it stop." Moses petitions the Lord, and it does. I don't know how much time frame goes between verse 3 and verse 4, but verse 4 then, now the complaining that went to gone to weeping, and saying, "We're hungry. We want something to eat besides what you've been giving us." Let me continue on before I give you the point, because it'll make more sense then. It says, verse 5, "We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers." Was it Caitlin or Josiah? When my wife was expecting Josiah, my wife loved cucumbers, could not get enough of the cucumbers. Verse 5 would have definitely been her. "We remember the cucumbers, and I've got to have some more." We remember not only the fish that we had in Egypt, we remember the cucumbers, we remember the melons. These last three things are all like spices to give something a little flavor. The leeks and the onions and the garlic. We remember how the food had taste back in Egypt. But now, and how often our complaining goes to shrieking and then on to weeping, because we remember what used to be, or at least part of what used to be. They're not remembering the abuse. They're not remembering the labor. They're not remembering the servanthood they were under. But they're remembering the food. But now what we live, what we know, what we see is this. Our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. And the manna was as coriander seed, as the color of bdellium. And the people went about and gathered it and ground it in the mills and beat it into mortar and baked it into pans and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was as the taste of fresh oil. Now I have to admit, in my day and age, when you see that taste of fresh oil, I'm kind of thinking like crude oil, which is certainly not what they're talking about. Going back to Exodus chapter 16, verse 31, when they were first hungry because they had nothing to eat, they described seed, similar, white, which has the idea of the color of, as it says here in Numbers 11, and it tasted like wafers made with honey. So there was a flavor to it. It was a sweet flavor. But what they're wanting now is something more than a sweet flavor. And from my understanding, when it says there, a taste of fresh oil in verse 8, when you would have those kind of, what am I trying to say? Not crackers, but kind of like of a wafer, of a cake. There was a different quality of the oil. And so you could tell a difference in how it tasted. And so the fact that this was fresh oil means that these were pretty good cakes. They tasted pretty good. But it is all that we have tasted for the last, literally, year. For a year now, we've only tasted this. It's a good taste. It's not bad. But it's becoming bad because it's the only taste we've had, and we're wanting something, we're wanting some meat, or wanting some spice, or we're wanting some flavor besides the same thing day after day after day after day. Verse 9 kind of gives us a review of what has been happening for the last year. When the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it. And then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent. And again, the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses also was displeased. And Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Certainly in times of leadership, verse 11 probably has hit every person in leadership, regardless of what the position is. Why me? Ultimately, Moses saying, this isn't working out. Why did you pick me? What did I do wrong to be in this role, to be in this position? Why does this have to happen to me? Verse 12. Have I conceived all these people? Are these my children? Am I responsible for them? Is this something that is my problem because they're having a problem? Have I begotten them that thou shouldest say unto me, Carry them in thy bosom as a nursing father, bear the sucking child unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? Whence should I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, Give us flesh that we may eat. I am not able to bear all those people alone because it is too heavy for me. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand. If I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Here's what is interesting about Moses' response here. This is not a Moses saying, I'm checking out, I'm done with this. Just kill me off now. I'm tired of it. I can't go on. Literally what Moses is seemingly saying here and kind of culminating here in verse 15 is this. And he in the midst of being the responsible party. You've probably lived this out. The people that are under me are having a very bad attitude, and their bad attitude is beginning to take root in my heart as well. What it seems that Moses is saying is, I've had enough with them and their attitude, and I'm beginning to see that attitude beginning to take place in my heart too. Kill me before I become like them. Is seemingly what is ultimately what Moses is saying here. It's not I'm tired of this. I don't want this anymore. I don't want this responsibility. I didn't ask for it. You gave it to me. Why me? It is literally, it seems to be what Moses is saying is partly that, but more so, their bad attitude. I'm not the one that asked for this. They're not my children. I didn't give birth to them. I don't know why they're my responsibility. And as I see their wickedness, their rebellious heart, their complaining, their bitterness, I'm beginning to see it pick up in my heart as well. And I'm done. I can't do this. And the Lord said unto Moses, stop right there if you're reading along with me. What would be God's answer if we were God? What would be his answer for us if we were in Moses' shoes? The people have gone from shrieking or complaining to shrieking. Moses come with a humble heart before them, petitioning for God's mercy for them, and God, he shows mercy. But almost immediately, it seems, we don't know how much time goes between 3 and 4, verses 3 and 4, but almost immediately then the outsiders begin to complain, and the insiders, the descendants of Abraham, begin to pick up that complaint. And we want something to eat besides this. And Moses goes before God and says, hey, I can't do this. I just can't. I don't have the means to feed them. I can't solve their problem. There is no way for me to solve this problem. I don't know why this is my problem. I'm beginning, and we can almost see it even in these words. Moses is, obviously, he's getting a little shrieky himself, if we can say it that way, which honestly, you're dealing with shrieking people. It's not too long before our hearts begin to have the temptation to lead to the same shrieking. And so here, as we read the words of Moses, we can begin to see his tenderness turns now into, I can't do this. I don't want this. I can't solve their problem. Why is this me? And Moses begins to shriek. Well, God's answer is not, Moses, what you need is a vacation. God's answer isn't, Moses, what you need is, you're right, I'll find someone else to lead them. God's answer isn't, Moses, here's what we will do. I'll take care of this. Don't worry about it. This is what God's answer says. And the Lord said unto Moses, gather unto me the 70 men of the elders of Israel. Remember a year ago when his father-in-law Jethro was watching Moses and says, well, you know what you're doing here as you're kind of being the judge among the entire nation? It's not good for you. It's not good for them. Find you among yourself 70 men. God says to Moses, here's the solution. Go get those 70 men, whom thou knowest to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them unto the tabernacle of the congregation, that they may stand there with thee. Now stop right there. That's not the end of the point, but I'm going to stop right there to give you my point. Not only when the shriek begins, we need to pray. Pray for God's mercy on those that are in need. Not judgment, not the smirk on our face that says, man, you deserve that one. But pray for God's mercy for them. When the shriek begins, as a leader, pray. When the weepers begin, I like this one, get help. You know, a lot of times in leadership, we can seem like we're standing alone. A lot of time, and again, I'm talking from the church, I'm talking from our homes, I'm talking in our jobs, I'm talking from whatever point of leadership position that we have. A lot of times, it can feel like when the weeping begins, it feels like I stand alone. God reminds Moses, you are not standing alone. For the last year, you've had 70 men alongside of you. Go get those men. And I will come down, and I will talk with thee there, and I will take of the Spirit which is upon thee, and will put upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with thee, that thou bear it not thyself alone. And say thou unto the people, sanctify yourselves again against tomorrow, when ye shall eat flesh, and ye shall eat flesh, for you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who shall give us flesh to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you flesh, and you shall eat. And ye shall not eat 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days, but even a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils. And it shall be loathsome unto you, because that you have despised the Lord which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why came we forth out of Egypt? And we continue on, verse 21, and Moses said to the people, among whom I am are 600,000 footmen, and thou hast said, I will give them flesh, that we may eat a whole month. See as Moses is getting a little shrieky himself, now he's beginning to question God's ability. You say you're going to do this? I can't do this, God. How are you going to do this? Shall the flocks and the herds that they've taken out of Egypt, shall we kill all of them so we can eat for a month? Almost as if that's the only way that this could be possible. The only way we can eat and fill these mouths of this many people for that long is if every kind of beast of burden that we brought with us is slaughtered and eaten. Shall the flocks and the herds be slain for them to suffice them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them? Moses is saying, God, this is an impossibility. We're here in the middle of nowhere. Even you, I don't know that you have the means to do that. How are you going to do this? The Lord said unto Moses, is the Lord's hand waxed short, that thou shalt not, whether my words, thou shalt see now whether my words shall come to pass unto thee or not. Moses, do you question my ability? Do you question the power of my hand? Do you question the strength that I have? Moses, why are you questioning me now? You know, the truth is, in leadership, a lot of times when the shrieking begins, it's difficult, but we can learn how to go to the Lord in prayer for mercy. We can do that. But when that complaining leads to shrieking, and the shrieking leads to weeping, but that starts to get old very fast. And it begins to feel like I stand alone in this. God reminds us that we don't stand alone. And maybe at times we'll be able to remind ourselves, you don't stand alone. Get help. And I'm not talking about psychological help. I'm not talking about vacation help. I'm not talking about get yourself a nice massage and just relax from it all. What God is pointing out to Moses is, hey, this is a lot of responsibility, but Moses, you're not bearing this by yourself. You've had 70 men all along with you. Bring those 70 men, and I'm about to give them some of the ability that you have so that they literally are equals with you in leading these people. Moses, you are not alone. We often need that reminder. We're not alone. And we need that reminder that our Lord's hand is not waxed short, even though I'm certain Moses sat down and figured it out. To feed these people is an impossibility. And then when God says for 30 days, Moses got to be saying, whoa, wait, slow down. This can't be done. We can't do this. But God's answer in verse 23 is, Moses, watch. I will do. A New Testament concept that when the world is falling apart around us, and it seems as though we are losing control, our responsibility, even in the New Testament, is not to ask for deliverance. Don't seek out an escape. When God closes the door, don't search the window and jump out of it. That's not a biblical truth. But instead, we need to seek help from the faithful. We need to realize that we're not there alone. And all those things do work together for good, but we have to be reminded that it's those difficult times that allow the good to happen in our life. There's something that Moses is going to learn about the hand of God that he will need to know in the future. And he will be able to remind them in the book of Deuteronomy, remind the people, hey, remember what God did? Something I learned about my God. His strength is far greater than I could ever imagine. Know that. Remember that. With the shriek pray. With weepers get help. Thirdly, with the peers be humble. Look at verse 24. And Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them around about the tabernacle. And the Lord in a cloud, and spake unto him, and took of the Spirit that was upon him, and gave it unto the 70 elders. And it came to pass that, when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, and did not. Our definition of prophecy is a little different than what was taking place back then. Obviously, they did not have the Bible. They did not have anything written down for them. And so the role that Moses had for them to this point was he was the man that would say, thus saith the Lord. This is what God has for you. Because the Spirit of the Lord was upon Moses. Now, there's 70 plus Moses that have the ability to say, thus saith the Lord. Literally is what that prophesied means. People now besides Moses that are able to say, this is what God has for us, here's what we need to do. It's not just Moses' voice, now there's 71 of them. Verse 26, but there remained 2 of the men in the camp. Now I don't know why they were still in the camp, why they didn't make it to the tabernacle. Perhaps they were unclean for whatever reason. Perhaps they were out hunting, trying to find food. Maybe they're trying to resolve it on their own. We don't know. I'm just throwing out some ideas. Maybe they weren't feeling well. I don't know what the situation is, but there's 2 men. So there's only 8 in the tabernacle, plus Moses. There's 2 men that, so for whatever reason, didn't make it, but they're part of the 70. There remained 2 of the men in the camp. The name of the one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them, and they were of them that were written, but went not out into the tabernacle, and they prophesied in the camp. So here we have 68 guys in the tabernacle, and the Spirit of the Lord falls upon them. That has only been on Moses to this point. And now they're all saying, kind of with opened eyes, hey, this is what God has for us. We get this. We see it now. We understand it. And amongst themselves, they begin to get excited about what God has in store for them. The very sight, that we can say it that way, that Moses had all along, now 68 of them do as well. There's 2 guys not in their group, but part of the 70 from back in Jethro's days. They're in the camp. They're by the people, and suddenly they start prophesying at the same time. These people in the camp aren't aware of what's going on in the tabernacle, and those people in the tabernacle aren't aware of what's going on outside of the camp. But here's these 2 guys, Medad and Eldad, and there ran a young man and told Moses, said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. And Joshua, here we have Joshua again. Remember, he's already stepped up in leadership to this point. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of his young men, answered and said, my lord Moses, forbid them. In other words, what is Joshua saying? They can't do that, Moses. This is your job. It's you. We go to you. We hear from you. It is your voice we need to hear. We can only get instruction from you. God only speaks to you, Moses. Tell them to stop. They can't be doing that. Obviously, Joshua at this point is only aware of these 2. Moses gathered him into the camp, he and the elders of Israel, and there went forth a wind. I'm getting here ahead, but Moses got him into the camp, he and the elders. Did I miss? I didn't. I apologize. I need to go back to the rest of verse 29. I didn't finish it. He says, and Moses' answer to Moses, forbid them. Here's the answer in verse 29. Moses said unto him, enviest thou for my sake? Would God that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon, basically, us all? In other words, what Moses is saying is, it's not just me, Joshua. Wouldn't the ideal be if every single one of us, of the 1 million of us, if we all knew what God had for us? If we could all say, even need me to lead us, because we would all be led by the Lord and know what it is that we have. I think this is a great testimony for what we have. We can say, thus saith the Lord. All of us, any of us, every single one of us. Moses is ultimately looking to our day and saying, oh, wouldn't that be great? When all of us can say that we have all that we need for our life and our godliness. We have that today. They didn't back then. And Joshua was pretty content at the fact of just having Moses be that voice. Joshua's pretty content that, hey, this is the way things have been going for the last 2 years. Moses, it has been you. We've come to you alone. Certainly there's been 70 guys that have been helping you judge and kind of straighten out all the quarrels. I get that, but as far as the leadership and what God has for us, it's just you, Moses. With the peers, or we can even say it going back on number 2, with the helpers. Be humble. What a reminder it is to us that as God sends us help, it's not that, hey, I'm so the chief here and my voice is the most important one. I get 10 voices and you only have one. Moses seems to have tremendous humility. From what he was just saying previously of why me, I'm not their father, why is this always my responsibility, to the realization that there's now 70 other people helping him. Joshua comes before him and says, hey, that can't be so. It's got to be just you, Moses. Moses steps back and says, I think it would be great if it was all of us. I think it would be great if every single person here could prophesy and say, this is what God has for us. This is where God is leading us. Humility, when the world is crashing around us, we have got to work at humility. Because it's in those moments that trigger and tighten our role, our position. We must have that sure foundation in, as we see it in Moses' life, a humble heart. So this is not just about me. It's not just about my voice. With the peers, with the help, with the 70, be humble. But then, imagine as Moses. So if you stop right there in the history, and you probably know what's going to come next, but if we stop right there, here the people have complained against God. That complaining has displeased God, and he brings down fire. Then they begin to shriek. Moses goes before the Lord and petitions his mercy, and God stops the fire. But it's enough fire that they even name the place the burning. Now the people begin to weep, and they begin to lust, and they say, I wish, I want, and I need. And Moses says, hey, this is too much for me. I can't do this. I can't answer. There's no way I can resolve this. And even seems to say, God, even you can't do this. Just kill me, because I can see my bitterness, or their bitterness, begin to take place in my life. I can see their complaining begin to take place in my heart. Their shrieking is now becoming part of my voice as well. Just put me out. I don't want to see myself in this wickedness, in their wickedness. Verse 31, and there went forth a wind from the Lord and brought quails from the sea and let them fall by the camp as it were a day's journey on this side and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp as it were 2 cubits high about the face of the earth. And they all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. And he that gathered at least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. Let me just say it this way. There was far more meat than they could ever eat. Day after day after day. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth. I stop there and just ask, if you were Moses, the people have complained and God spared, and they've gone another step and they're weeping and they're lusting and God provides, when is it in our hearts that we begin to say, this isn't fair? In other words, Lord, stop showing mercy. This shouldn't be happening. I need to be doing something. I need to be stopping this. And we begin to want to take in our response. In other words, go back to that word karma. We want to be the ones that give out the karma here. But look at verse 33. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. He called the name of that place whatnot, Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people that lusted. And the people journeyed from Kibroth Hattaavah onto Hazeroth and abode at Hazeroth. Do you see what is happening? In verse 34, we don't have any details. We're not sure of what this very great plague was. Maybe it was COVID-01, for all we know. It is possible, and I just throw this out as a possibility, that for 2 years all they've had is honey-sweetened cake. And for the first time in 2 years, they are having flesh. And for those that are lusting, they're probably eating way too much. flesh, too much meat, too much protein. And I've got to think, again, this is just a focus on the medical alone. I've got to think that going for 2 years without meat and then engorging yourself with meat, that's got to be a horrid experience in the gut, in the digestion. I don't know if this was what was taking place. We don't know. But what we do know is that they buried enough people there that the name of it was called, basically, the buried place. And there was enough people that were brought to their death because of their lusting, because of their complaining. And the people left, and they go to the next place. You know, I guess I didn't put up the last point here. With the rebels, be patient. We don't see any reference to what Moses is doing during this time. We don't see Moses standing off to the side, shaking his head, saying, this isn't fair, they shouldn't be enjoying this. These people are just stinking rebels. And all they do is complain. God keeps giving and giving and giving, and they just keep complaining. They shouldn't be... we don't know what is going on in Moses' mind, what's going on with his actions, but we see God at work. And we see the judgment of God is falling as it should with God. But sometimes I think in leadership we want to take that role. We want to be the God. If we want to be able to hand out and measure out judgment where judgment we feel is due, we want to take the control there and do the karma, so to speak. But with the rebels, you got to be patient. Allow God to do what God is going to do. But we've got to be faithful in what God has called us to do. With the shriek, pray. It's not easy to do. With the weepers, this one's the easy one to do. When the weeping starts, get help. If you've had teenage daughters, when the weeping starts, get your wife. When the weepers start, get help. Remind yourself that you are not alone. With the peers, be humble. With the rebels, be patient. Things are going to fall apart in whatever roles of leadership we have, but our responsibility still remains that we've got to be faithful what God has called us to, even when the world falls around us. Are we faithful? Are we knowing what true leadership is all about? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for your word. For example, the children of Israel, for the testimony of Moses. His failure there in the middle of the chapter is a reminder to us through you of how we should be as well. And I just pray that you challenge our hearts. Certainly each one of us has a role, has a position. Each one of us has the opportunity to be a servant leader in our communities where we work, in our homes, among others, even here in our church. And I pray that when the world falls apart, when chaos hits, when even in what we're going through right now, COVID, I just pray that as the world seems to flip upside down at times on us, that we be reminded of our continued role that you've called us to. And that while it's easy to fall into the shoes of Moses, even at times in admitting our insufficiencies and even complaining about it, I pray that we be reminded of your mighty hand, your great arm, and I pray that you just remind us to trust in you and be faithful, following after you. And we give you the glory for it in Jesus' name. Amen.